Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I'm going to present about some of the extension program that we have in Nebraska. So of course, so many people have talked about different technologies, so much technologies, but then we still have an issue of adoption. So this program is trying to see how we can be able to facilitate adoption. So my name is Abia. I'm assistant professor at Nebraska, University of Nebraska. And part of my appointment is research and extension. So I'm going to present about some of the extension work I'm doing in West Central Nebraska, where irrigation is needed. So my talk is about producer engagements to promote the adoption of moisture sensors and effective data-driven decisions through an irrigation outreach program. So my outline is going to briefly talk about irrigation, because some of you might be asking yourself, is irrigation important in Nebraska? Yeah, it is. And then some of the technology adoption dilemma in the US. We have very interesting technologies, but when you go and ask a farmer, how do you irrigate? Some of them have no clue about some of the existing technology. So we are trying to expose those technologies to them. And I'm going to really touch about some of the outreach programs. There are universal extension programs in tech adoption. And then I'm going to highlight some of my program that I call Mobile Irrigation Testing Lab. And I'm going to really discuss about some of the partnership we have with different stakeholders involving the tech companies, the state, natural resource districts, the state departments, as well as the university that I represent. And then some of the ways we are recruiting producers to be able to take the technology on their fields. And then now some of the testimonies, some of the producers we have worked with, are they seeing the value in the technology? Some of them do. So I'm going to share some of those testimonies and some of the lessons we have learned so far. So irrigation is important in Nebraska because as you move from eastern Nebraska, they don't need irrigation. So they get a lot of rain. But as you tend to go to the west, there's a reduction in precipitation. So every 25 miles you travel, you're reducing 2 inches of rain. By the time you get to western Nebraska, in normal years, you're getting maybe like 10 inches, but in a very dry year, they usually get 8 inches on average. And then if you're growing corn, which needs almost 24 inches of water to be able to get good yields, you need to supplement that with irrigation. And in this area, we are seeing a lot of drought. So most of the time, we are almost around D3, D2 extreme drought. So which means, those crops need to be supplemented with irrigation. And of course, we are seeing high ET numbers. So which means, most of the crop grown is corn. So it uses a lot of water. So those ET numbers are high, which means the crop is actually taking a lot of water. So we're doing some research on the Extension Center, just look at irrigation trends. But then as you can see in this figure, for a rainfed crop that doesn't need irrigation, that where you don't have irrigation, roughly you're getting around 120 bushels of corn. So which means we need to irrigate to be able to reach the optimum yields, right? But then it doesn't mean that when you put on a lot of water, you're going to increase the yield. You reach that optimum whereby however much you put on extra water, you're not going to get any bump in yields. And at some point, you're going to reduce the yields because you're oversaturating the soil. So the crop roots are not getting sufficient oxygen to respire. You're suffocating the microorganisms. So you're not going to see any breakdown of organic matter in the soil. So basically, we need to irrigate better to increase the yields. But at the same time, we need to increase those profits by either maximizing the yields or maybe reducing energy, because the more water you put on the crop, the more energy you need to be able to pull that water from the aquifer. But you see, so I went around this season, this year, asking producers, how much water did you put on in 2024? Some of them were telling me I put on 14 inches of water. So some of them were excess of 12 inches. But literally you needed only 8 inches of irrigation to be able to get to those optimized yields. So, well, what are some of the challenges of poor irrigation? You're going to lose yields, as you've seen in this graph, right? In this production curve. You're going to lose money because you're using more energy to pump extra water that you don't need. And we have a challenge of nitrate leaching. I'm going to show you some of the map where we're having issues of high nitrates in groundwater, because the more you irrigate, the more water you put on the crop, you're going to wash all the fertilizers into the aquifer. But of course, we are trying to see how they could manage their irrigation. But I think the first starting point is for them to be able to realize that they need to irrigate better. So they need irrigation scheduling tools. They need technology to know when they're supposed to irrigate. And I think Hemedra talked about that. So farmers are pumping groundwater, but then we are seeing declines. So in some regions, we are seeing a decline of 5 feet every year. So which is no good, because the more we have decline in groundwater, the more we actually depleting the aquifer. So we need to be careful. You can see some of those red hot spots in Nebraska where farmers are irrigating. We are starting to see high nitrates in groundwater. So now we are starting to ask the question, how can we do better so that we don't deplete the aquifer, but at the same time, we don't pollute the aquifer? So what farmers can do is they need to start thinking about using advanced technologies to be able to know when they're supposed to irrigate. If they have these technologies, they can be able to account every drop of water they pump out of the aquifer and that drop that goes to the crop. Of course, I've shown you some of the challenges. We need to cut down on nitrate leaching. We need also to reduce groundwater withdrawals. But at the same time, as farmers are driven by money, by profits, they have to have a mindset of environmental stewardship, because they need to conserve water in terms of quantity and quality for future generations. The bottom line is they need effective irrigation scheduling tools. But then see the dilemma in the US, based on the surveys of how farmers are irrigating. Most of them, I think Hemedra has talked about that. They just look at the crop and say, hey, I think it is stressed, I need to put on water. Or they feel the soil, right? See the adoption rate of soil moisture sensors. It's still very low, right? So we are seeing only 10% compared to 78% of observing the crop, but at the same time, 40% of hand soil fill. So from the university standpoint, how can we help them to adopt more technology like soil moisture sensors? We need to do some on-farm demos of these technologies for them to gain confidence, right? We need to work with farmers. So in extension, we have educators and specialists in Nebraska. How can these two people work together for us to push this to producers? And also, the way some industries the way they're promoting that technology, they're telling farmers how much yield they'll get, how much return on investment will be if they have the technology. But then they don't allow farmers to actually get this data by themselves. So part of what we are doing is to give them the technology, and they're able to collect those numbers for them to judge whether they need the technology or not. And of course, we are trying to create experiential learning opportunities for us to learn from each other. You know, we don't go as experts, but we go to learn as a team. Someone talked about citizen science. So that's what we're trying to do, is to engage the producers and we sit on the same table. So as I was developing this program, you know, the program needs to be in the center. Of course, we have the university, we have the tech companies, we have the stakeholders that are our target people, but then we also have state organizations. So what we are seeing is that these two people are talking to producers, but then these guys, the companies that have the sensors, some of them don't have the direct connection with producers. So how do we bridge that gap, right? So that's why we came up with this outreach program that is called Mobile Irrigation Testing Lab. So the motivation is, of course, it's UNL's Outreach and Extension Irrigation Program that is working with producers to improve irrigation efficiency, productivity, and profitability through promoting and exposing them to effective and data-driven technology. So the idea is to ease adoption and improve irrigation management while enhancing water use efficiency and water conservation. So the way we recruited producers is we have direct recruitment between some university extension programs. So we have other extension programs that are focusing on soil health, agronomy, but then we don't have a program that is looking at water conservation on their farms. Of course, we are also working with natural resource districts. We have water bodies that kind of try to help producers to know, to cut down on how much they're pumping. And we have some progressive farmers like, so one of the big producers in Nebraska is Rory Coleman. So we look for those producers and they're able to recommend us with some of the other producers. But then before we get the number of farmers, but the first thing is we need to build relationships. So what we do, we make phone calls, we schedule visits, and then go talk with producers and ask them a question: how do you irrigate? So some of them they've tried sensors and they've given up. Some of them have never used any technology. So we want to know where they are in terms of understanding how technology can be used. And then the next thing is we engage the companies to give us the technology, right? Either we have lease agreements or rent. So we rent out the technology. So we pay them, but then we give that technology free to a producer, because if you're going to tell them to pay for the technology, they won't be willing to test. So what we are doing is, okay, we put in some money, we get the technology and provide that technology for free to farmers to use. And then we install that technology on their farms and we collect the data. After that, we actually sit with them to understand the data and how they're using it for irrigation scheduling. So we are trying to track the behavior changes, right? So this is like a closed loop. So we get producers, build relationships, get the technology in their fields. And then after that, we see, have they seen any increase in yields? Are they saving water? So things like that. So some of the technologies that we are promoting and other companies are getting on board, we have AquaSpy, we have Soiltech, we have ArtScout, we have Centec. But then more companies are going to come on board. So we started this program in 2024 in West Central Nebraska. So we worked with 6 farmers, and each of those farmers were able to provide at least 4 fields. So in total, we had 20 producer fields. So these are center pivot irrigated fields. Of course, you'll be asking why few soybean fields. So in this part of Nebraska, most farmers grow corn, but some are starting to maybe rotation, like corn and soybean rotation. So they're starting to pick up on growing soybeans. So this is how we do. So we have the farmer fields, we go in, install the technology, right? You can see the Soiltech sensors in the field in the soybeans. We do the Centec probes in there. So then after that, after growing season, we sit with the producer and say, hey, did you see any change? So we have some interesting testimony from Doyle. He used a Centec sensor. This is what he said. These tools help me to monitor the wetness of my soil profile as well as comparing the data with agronomist recommendation. So before then, he was using a crop consultant to tell him when he's supposed to irrigate. And these crop consultants, they use hand soil, they just probe the soil. But then see, after he got the technology, he was able to save 2.5 inches of water. If you convert that into gallons, on that field, he saved almost 8.8. So just imagine if everyone in that area has technology and they're saving at least 1 inch of irrigation. How much water are we saving in the aquifer? So much, right? So in conclusion, producers love to use technology, but then there's still a gap. So the companies are making the technology, but then some of them don't have that connection with the consumer. And then the other thing is some are starting to cut on their irrigation, and some are starting to gain confidence in the data, because if they don't use data for irrigation management, they're going to still pump more groundwater for irrigation. And what we have seen is that I think as each university, we need to have more outreach programs focused on irrigation. If let's say in those areas, most producers are irrigating, because they need the information to be able to optimize their applications. And then the other thing we have seen, water conservation is possible if farmers start to use the data for their water management decisions. And then in our case going forward, we are going to try to track not only the behavioral change, but then the changes in yield and how much water they are saving. With that, thank you so much. And you can follow us on Twitter. Yeah, thank you.